And next up, I know he does not need an introduction, but Jon Delano has done an amazing job here of not only putting together today's panel and discussion, but of being my co-board member for the past, we are on our 6th year together.
Right.
So Jon and I activated together in the winter of 2020. And since that time, Jon has been an invaluable resource here at the Historical Society of Mount Lebanon. From doing things like filming videos when we were all at home for our fundraisers, and just being an amazing presence and bringing people together even though we couldn't be in the same room, to putting so much heart and soul into this current exhibit. I get a little teary because the inspiration that Jon obviously experienced from his mother is a gift to all of us. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Jon to introduce our wonderful panelists today. And thank you for being here, everybody.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth. You know, it is easy to get teary-eyed over barrier-breaking women in Mount Lebanon, because I suspect every woman here is a barrier breaker of one sort or another. Mount Lebanon has always been the home of some terrific women, and I see many of you here. In fact, you far outnumber the men in this room. As you do politically and electorally. But one of the things we're going to discuss today is why not on the commission? Because this Mount Lebanon Commission has really had a glass ceiling that's been tough for women for many, many decades. We're very honored to have a very distinguished panel here today. And we're going to hear more about their own bios in a moment or two, but just very quickly, CAROLYN, the second woman in Mount Lebanon to be elected to the commission. Big applause for COLEEN VUONO, the fourth woman, another huge barrier breaker. And Ann Swagger Wilson, what can you say? Our only woman commissioner right now on the Mount Lebanon Commission. Thank you, guys. It's really amazing to me, as someone who loves history and who was involved in putting together this exhibit, which I hope afterwards you will take the time to go around, not just our wonderful commissioners, our women commissioners, but so many other Mount Lebanon barrier breakers that are up on the walls all around and up above. So please make sure you have a chance to take a look at that exhibit. I'm going to ask the panelists, I want to talk a little bit about why they think there may have been challenges for women in Mount Lebanon to get elected to the municipal board. We've been electing women to school boards for years. It's like we think women, we think education. But somehow or other, we have a barrier when it comes to municipal governance. And our first woman commissioner, Mary Larson, who passed away recently, I'm going to start off by asking for remembrances of her, if I could. She was elected in 1977, took office in 78, served with CAROLYN on the commission in CAROLYN's years, then went off the commission after 8 years, and my mother, Jon Delano, who was a very good friend of Mary Larson's, was encouraged by Mary to run for the office, even though she was a different party. Mary also encouraged CAROLYN, right, to run for office as well. So Mary Larson, whose picture is right there, and you can read a little bit more about her bio, was one of these incredible women in Mount Lebanon. She, I will say very quickly, was somebody, she was the nicest person, most self-effacing person you could possibly meet. Was not big on the fact that she was the first. In fact, some of you may remember we had a Mount Lebanon News back then, a newspaper in the community. And when they mentioned her swearing in to the commission, they did not mention at all that she was the first woman in Mount Lebanon history. So I'm going to start with this question, then we're going to come back to each of these women's personal experiences. But I want to remember Mary Larson because she was the very first glass ceiling breaker. So CAROLYN, awfully good to have you here. Thank you so much for being part of this. I'm going to pass a mic. It's on. And I want to just ask you to reflect a little bit about Mary Larson and your experience with her as our first woman commissioner in Mount Lebanon.
You know, Mary was also a Christian Scientist,
Yes.
which I think very few people knew, and that she was always there with her glass of water or tea without the tea bags. We moved to Mount Lebanon in 1970 from New York. I had worked as an account executive at an advertising agency. And so when we moved here in 1970, first thing I did was join Legal Women Builders and AAUW, and I was also president of the Mount Lebanon Civic League. And so I thought after 4 years or 5 years, I was more than qualified to sit on the school board. And I went for the interview and was turned down. And 2 days later, I happened to go to a dinner at a woman friend from Mount Lebanon, and Mary Larson was there. And she said, "I just heard what they did to you, Carolyn." I said, "Thank you." And she said, "You know, you'd be wasted on the school board." She said, "All they do is approve the people who are going to be getting pensions and nothing." She said, "You should be a commissioner." And so that's what really happened. Mary talked me into it. And then the fluky thing was that my college roommate was married to Jim Strader. And as I ran against Jim Strader and beat him. And so Ann will never say who she voted for.
Another example of a very smart woman. Colleen, your reflections on Mary Larson.
Well, I didn't really know Mary as well as Carolyn did and June did, because I guess I was coming on when she was kind of off. I want to talk about how I got interested in this, and I'm from a small town called Denora, and no one in my family was ever involved in politics or government. And I don't know where this came from, except I do remember being inspired by John Kennedy. And, you know, I was a young person, and I guess I was pretty idealistic at the time. And when he spoke, I thought, he's making a lot of sense, and I want to be part of what's good about this country. And I think that in order to do that, you sort of have to be involved in government. And it wasn't about politics, it was about government. So that was really the beginning for me. And then I moved to Mount Lebanon in 1970 and was asked to be a Democratic committee woman. And that kind of got me then in that whole era of learning all about politics. And back then there were very few Democrats in Mount Lebanon, but it didn't matter. I mean, we all got along, and that just pushed me forward. I have to say one thing though about being a woman, which was not easy, because the men really didn't feel that, a lot of men, not all, a lot of men didn't feel that we were as qualified to be in the positions we were in. And I remember one meeting, and it was Carolyn, June, and I. So we were the 3 women commissioners, and we were the majority, because there were 5 of us, 3 women, 2 men. And we were voting on an issue where the church that is at the corner of Holycrest and Cedar, okay, wanted to purchase that property that was across the street from them, a green space, to put a parking lot, so the cars could park there. And it was so interesting, because the 3 women said, "Oh, we want green space. We want to preserve whatever green space we have in Mount Lebanon." And so it was so wonderful, because we were the majority. That didn't happen often. But it was, the vote was 3-2. And, you know, we won the vote, and it is still green space in the. So, you know, those are things that I look back and think, yeah, we did some good. You know, we did good.
Yeah, let's remind everybody, that was 1988 to 1991. it was the first and only time in Mount Lebanon history that the majority of commissioners were women. COLEEN, June, and CAROLYN. My mother used to say she didn't care one way or the other. She was the first Democratic woman elected. As COLEEN said back in those days, it was pretty hard for a Democrat to win. And my mother didn't care about the party stuff so much as she did about gender, because she insisted that Mount Lebanon's best years were when these three women My sister Sarah is here, and Sarah will reaffirm when I say that my mother also said many times, as the mother of 4 boys and only 1 girl, my mother would say many times that women were the superior biological unit. She wasn't right about everything. And did you know Mary?
I knew Mary because Mary lived behind me when I lived on Altadena Drive with a brand new baby. So the thing I remember about Mary Larson was she was one of the most intelligent women I had ever met, and she was so calm. Nothing ruffled her. Meanwhile, I'm a freaking mess. I've got a kid, I don't know what I'm doing. Life is in an uproar constantly at my house, but Mary was always the calm in the storm. And she, many of you may not know this, but she helped put together the Home Rule Charter for Mount Lebanon. And that's something I've always admired, because policy, I think, is really tough. The words are important, and Mary knew exactly what words to use. So I have great admiration for her.
Well, thank you for those reflections on her, and people can read more about Mary once you know. I want to ask about the challenges. COLEEN, I think you mentioned that it was tough being a woman on basically an all-male body. And in your years, when you first started, they had no experience with women. I mean, they had CAROLYN, June, and you, essentially married from the beginning. But usually it was only one woman at a time, and the men were really running the show. Did you feel you were treated differently as a commissioner back in those days because of your gender?
Oh, definitely. And it wasn't just with the fellow commissioners, it was with staff. You can imagine, I don't know whether any of you remember Jim Kane.
Oh, yeah.
Jim Harris. I mean, these are 250, 300-pound guys who have been in public works and so forth. And I remember one of the first things that I had to vote on was they were putting out bids for new police cars, and they got one bid. And they wanted us to approve it. And I said, no. I said, every single housewife would know that you don't go with just one bid.
Yes, COLEEN, your reflections on how you were treated in those early days.
We were treated differently, differently. And it was sometimes that they wanted to sort of put you in place, so that
By
was.
they, do you mean the commissioners and the staff?
Both, yes. And I remember it was your mother, John, who started. She wanted to have a performance evaluation of the township manager, and that had not been done in the past. And here we are. We've got this person running this entire township, and no one's checking to see what kind of jobs he's doing. So she started that, and the township manager at the time, who was Jim Kane, wasn't real pleased, but he had to go along with it. She also started something where once, I think it was once a month, or maybe every 2 weeks, the president of the commission would meet with the township manager to go over various things. Now, if you're working in business or wherever, this is a natural thing. But here, there was a lot of resistance. And people felt that because he was a man, I guess, and we were women, we shouldn't be sitting down evaluating his performance. But we did. So it was, there was obvious, I wouldn't say tension, but you could feel that a lot of people were having a hard time understanding how to relate to us because we were women. And they felt that we probably weren't as smart as the men.
And did anything change? Have things changed different
Yes.
today?
I think it has. Now, my children would probably say it's the force of my personality. Like, what? You're gonna, give my mother a hard time? I don't think so. But I don't know if it's that or I really have no problem with my fellow commissioners looking differently at me. We have a great collegiality amongst the 5 of us. And staff I relate to well, but remember, my background is infrastructure, town design. It's I can talk about sewers. I understand sewers. I get all that stuff. And I think that probably has helped a lot in that that's a common bond. So I don't feel disrespected in any way from the staff. I get along well with them, have good communication with them, and maybe they're just used to women now, or they know me. I don't know, but it's gone well.
So how many women staff are there?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Good question. Fair amount though, a fair amount, but not that many in the
Senior positions, I think,
in
are
the
male.
senior positions are mostly male. Yeah.
Just
Laura is public information, and then her name just went right out of my head. Human Resources is run by a female. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I don't know how to use this mic, but
Sure.
apparently the law mic I was using is not working. Although I'm loud, so you can.
You're doing great.
Carolyn, you told me when we were preparing this exhibit that you felt women commissioners, women in general, are better listeners.
Yes.
Elaborate on that. Why would a woman be a better commissioner than a man?
Well, I was telling this story to somebody recently that when I was commissioner, my children were in 4th or 5th grade or something like that. And I don't think there was a night that didn't go by when the phone would ring at dinner time. And the children would answer the phone and this person would say, I'm so-and-so on such and such street. I know your mother, I know Mrs. BYHAM is not my commissioner, but this is my problem. So the children would automatically say, well, we're having dinner right now, and they had a pad of paper there. She said, just give me your name and telephone number, and mother will call you back after dinner. And I just think people felt more comfortable talking to a woman about their trash than they did to bother an attorney or a stockbroker. And I just also think that women are better at multitasking than men are.
Great comments. Colleen, can you reflect on that same question? Well, it's a very argumentative question. Do women make better commissioners than men, and why?
I would agree with what Carolyn said, absolutely. I think qualities that women bring, are different than the qualities that men bring. And men do bring their set of, qualities and skills, but so do women, and they are different. I think that I was remembering one time we had an issue, and I don't know if any of you will remember, it was about cats.
Oh, yes.
Oh, cats.
On leashes.
Leashes,
Cats. There was this, it came up that certain people in the township felt that the cats had free roam, and they didn't like that. And they thought we should put cats on leashes. So it actually became an agenda item, and we have to vote on it. And that particular year, we had rotated being president of the commission. Each year there was a different president, just through rotation. So that particular year I was the president. And that night we were going to vote, and prior to the meeting, someone from the news media came. And I said, this must be a slow news day. So it came to a vote, and the way it worked was if there was a tie, and there were 5 of us, that then only then would the president vote. So the vote was 2, Carolyn and June against this. 2 of the men worked for it, and then I got to break the tie. And I was so happy because I voted against it, because we thought it was absolutely ridiculous. But there were, the 2 men who were in favor of doing this, and I thought that was an example of maybe the different ways we think.
I do have to, I can identify the 2 men privately if you'd like. I got the list of all the commissioners. But I remember that story.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember my mother talking about how crazy, what a crazy idea. I'm sure you still, you really want to know?
Yeah, yes.
Let me look it up while I answer. You didn't have that phone, yeah.
No, we haven't voted on cats, not yet, anyway. Actually, I remember a commission meeting that I sat in on when June was on the commission, John. And I remember being very impressed with the respect with which she treated the people in the room. It was stunning in comparison to other commissioners at the time. She would listen, she was very respectful, she thanked people for coming, she thanked people for their time. She just treated people the way I felt they should be treated. And that was the lesson I took away. So I still try very hard when people call to thank them for calling, to return emails, to return calls, to talk to people and listen. And your mother is the one that I really modeled a lot of that behavior after.
Well, do you think generally women make better commissioners?
Oh, I don't know that I would say that one way or the other. I think to be a good commissioner, you have to be someone who can listen. You also have to be someone who can look at the large picture and recognize you're a small part of it. Like, let's not let our egos get out of hand. You're just a commissioner. And you have to work cooperatively. You know, it is a give or take. Politics has always been a give or take, and it isn't any different now than it was years ago. Maybe the horse trading is out in public a little bit more, but it's still give or take. You're only part of it.
Well, since former Commissioner BYHAM asked me, the year in which COLEEN VUONO was president was 1990.
Wow.
And you, Colleen, June, and Carolyn were the majority commissioners by gender. And the 2 men were Tom Stevenson and Ed Daly.
Oh, wow. Well, that says a lot. Forever outspoken.
So I wanted to ask about partisanship because Carolyn, you were a Republican, ran as a Republican candidate. Colleen, you were a Democrat. And I know, Ann, you're a Democrat. But
Everybody is
But the
Democrat.
commission is all Democrats. Back when you served, Carolyn, it was majority Republican, and it was still majority Republican, Colleen, when you served. A lot of people will say that really partisan politics isn't all that critical when it comes to municipal governance. Is it your sense that it is more important these days, or is less important, or was more important back then, or that gender meant more than partisanship? Just thoughts.
No, I definitely think gender made more importance. We never really talked about anything about politics back then. I just think, and when my daughter asked me if I was going to say what party I was with now, I'm a Democrat. But it was the 1990 or 1989 was the year that I ran for the legislature.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah, your sign is right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I lost the election, but during that time, there was an issue in my ward, was the 3rd ward, that the people wanted sidewalks on Woodland going to the school. And there was one very an active pilot who lived there, and I worked with him, probably 80, 90 hours to try to get the neighbors to agree to put in some sidewalks and with us approving. Well, I thought we had the whole thing settled, and that night I went with my father to a spaghetti dinner at the Methodist church. And there was this pilot handing out brochures for my opponent.
Oh, there we go.
And I said, he said, well, I'm sorry, my union is supporting Greg Fight. And I just thought, how many dozens, hundreds of hours have I spent with you to try to solve this problem for your children? And you've done this for me? I mean, it was a real shock.
I think at the state legislative level, it's different.
Yes, it is.
When it comes to partisan politics. How about you, Colleen?
Yeah.
You ran countywide once.
Yes, I did. Yes, I don't think partisan politics ever entered into our discussions when I was on the commission. It just wasn't relevant. You know, we were there about government, we were there about Mount Lebanon, taking care of people who lived here, what can we do for people who lived here. And I have to say that I was very lucky because I was pretty young back in 1990. I was in my 30s, early 30s, mid 30s. And I didn't really know anything about being a commissioner when I was elected. So I had these two wonderful women, Carolyn and June, to look to. And I watched everything they did. I learned from them. I learned how to interact with the staff. I learned how to interact with the public. It was such a wonderful experience for me just to learn from these two women. And I will go, and I'll comment, yes, I did run countywide, and I lost that election. And, well, first I should say, the first time I ran for commissioner of Mount Lebanon, I worked so hard, I went door to door, every door, and I lost by 13 votes.
Oh my gosh.
And those 13 votes were absentee ballots.
Oh, wow.
So I actually won at the polls, but I lost when they counted. It was so interesting. And someone told me that at the high school, they used my election as a,
That's
something to
interesting.
teach children about
Wow.
the importance of voting.
Mhm.
But when I was running countywide, that was another example of really how women were perceived, because I had a male running mate. And we would have to go and meet with various people throughout Allegheny County. And invariably, when we would sit down, they would focus on him. They wouldn't even look my way. And I learned, it didn't take me long to learn, speak up, let them know that you know what you're talking about, which I did. And then the focus would switch and they would talk to me. But you had to do that. You had to learn how to address these issues as a woman. And back then, that's what I learned I had to do. I had to prove to them that I had the intelligence to be a good candidate. So,
And we're back to one-party rule. It used to be one-party rule and for
Yeah.
many, many years. Jim Strader, Colleen, you referenced Ann Strader. Jim Strader was the first Democrat elected to the Mount Lebanon Commission, and I think that was, I have the year 1970, I believe it was. He was elected in 1974 from the 4th Ward.
Yeah,
He
sure.
later moved into the 3rd Ward.
Mhm.
Carolyn beat him. But yeah, now that it used to be all Republican for decades. Now it's turned all Democrat. As
But
part
it's
of-
still the stronger, Third Ward still has the most Republicans
Yeah.
of any
That's
of the
your
five.
word.
That's my word. So I'm happy to report that construction begins on sidewalks on Woodland on Monday. So that battle has finally been won. But actually, there's quite a bit of partisanship in the essence of, there are a lot of culture wars going on, as you all know. We've decided to take words and make words have importance that they really wouldn't have otherwise. And that comes back to us a lot. I mean, I think as a commission, we're trying to work hard to be a very welcoming, open community where everybody's rights are in fact respected, et cetera, et cetera. And those are things that I don't think we've ever had in local politics until most recently. And we fight that on a regular basis. We get, the library recently declared themselves a sanctuary for books. And we've gotten some blowback from that, very little from people in person, but of course now there's social media. It's kind of like passing notes when you were in middle school. So-and-so like so-and-so, now it's, can you believe they did that? Only it's on social media. So that's where we see the partisanship, is right there. Otherwise, no.
Very interesting. That library, sanctuary library, which I think is wonderful.
I think so too.
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, no son or daughter of June Delano, who is such an educator, who believes all books should be available to everybody.
Right.
Whatever support banning books. I actually texted Chris DeLuzio, our congressman, when Mount Lebanon Library did that, because it was at the same time that his alma mater, the U.S. Naval Academy, Secretary Pete Hegseth banned 50 books.
Yes.
And these were books, Maya Angelou, I mean, books that should never be banned. They have since rescinded that rule. But I reminded Chris that, when you're thinking of exemplary libraries, think of Mount Lebanon. Right? So, I do want to open this up. I want to open this up for questions, comments, and thoughts from people in the audience. I can go on because I always have a ton of talk to do. But anybody have a question or a thought or comment? Yeah, and let's pass the mic.
I just have a comment that what Ann said about it's easier for you now to relate with men applies directly to what we're talking about here, barrier-breaking women. That both Carolyn and Colleen helped break the barrier. And I'm sure you're still breaking it more for women along the way. So thank all of you for that.
Good comment. But let's ask Ann, are there more barriers to break?
Oh, always, of course, there always are.
Give us examples.
Well, one would be putting more women in the municipal government itself.
Right.
But I also find there's more of the Old Boys Network involved in some of the other organizations around town to which we have to be on those boards. That's where I find more of it.
Are you
But,
thinking of some of the athletic associations?
Well, not just athletic, I'm not gonna name any. I'm gonna try to.
I tried.
Just for once, I can see my husband in the back row going, yeah. Cut it out. Do not reveal. But, I do see some of that, but I've never worked in any profession that wasn't mostly men. I went to a women's college, I was told I could do anything I wanted in my life and that I should never let the fact that it was all male be a problem. So I barged ahead, sometimes more successfully than others, but I haven't let it, but I've watched that politics.
So when you said the barriers to be broken, one would be just the employment of women in general.
The employment of women in general, but also you were asking why there weren't more women commissioners. I'm retired. That's when I became a commissioner because I'm no longer taking care of my parents, may they rest in peace. My children are grown. I already told my children I would babysit the grandchildren on occasion, but I was not going to be the lead babysitter. My husband retired, is no longer a soldier, so those are many of the reasons that I could do what I do now. But I think if you have a full-time career and kids, and it takes a lot to be a commissioner. It takes a lot of time.
Colin, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because when I was a commissioner the first time, and I served the full 4 years. At the end of that time, there were a lot of things going on in my life. I worked full-time, I had a full-time job, then I was a commissioner, then I had 2 teenagers, and then both my parents were very ill. And at the end of that time, when I had to run again, I had to decide, can I really continue to do this? And I think this is something that affects women more than men.
Absolutely.
you know, so I made the choice, and I made the right choice, I chose my family. So I had to leave it. I loved being a commissioner, I loved what I was able to do, but, you know, women have to make these choices.
I was also working full-time when I was a commissioner, and at one point, I think I said, I think I probably worked 30 hours a week as a commissioner.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It was a lot of response, yeah,
It takes a lot of time,
yeah,
a lot of evenings too.
yeah.
Oh, a lot of ton of evenings, and of course, nowadays, I gotta believe it's much worse in terms of Carolyn talked about the telephone communications, the kids would answer, Casey would answer. Today, you got social media, you got the cell phones, you got nonstop, text messages, Facebook, and you also have the lack of civility. It's when you call somebody and are talking face to face, you're much more likely to be civil than you are when you're writing either a text message or posting something on Facebook, particularly if you're anonymous.
Yes, exactly.
If you're anonymous, then you really go at people in a most uncivil way. I did want to ask about the sort of the politics of running for commissioner. And if it's tougher, I mean, because we see women running for school board.
Yeah.
We have lots of women on the ballot on the school board. But this year, for example, we've got elections in Ward 2 and Ward 4. There's one woman running. So it's still not easy in 2025 any more than it was in the 1970s, Carolyn, when you started. So what do you think? I mean, is there just lack, do you think it's the family issues or just lack of interest, or what is it? No, maybe Ann, we should start with Ann, because you're closer to today's politics.
Well, I think time is one issue, certainly. I think it takes a certain personality to be a commissioner. I mean, going up to a stranger's door, knocking on the door and saying your name and who you are and what you do and why you want to be a commissioner takes some guts, I think. My husband walked around with me more because I have trouble with my knees getting up and down steps than anything else, but still he was there behind me through all of this, and I didn't ever, they give you a list of the houses to go to, which are all your parties, so you don't really get too many negative people. What you tend to get is people who don't answer the door and you know they're home, because the kids are running around. You're like, look, come on, open the door. But I think time is one of the biggest things, and I think personality-wise, you know the biggest question I got when I was campaigning? You're never going to believe this. The question, abortion. How do you stand on abortion?
What?
How do you stand on abortion?
On the commissioner level.
On the commissioner level. And I would say, well, they know I have nothing to do with it. I can tell you how I personally feel, which is for women's rights to choose, but I don't have any, I don't get to weigh in on that.
Well, this is part of
A lack of education.
lack of civics.
It's lack of civics.
When I was at Mellon Junior High over there, I had an 8th grade required civics class.
Right.
I don't know if they require civics anymore. It was a semester of civics and a semester of Pennsylvania history. And we were all required by state law to take those courses. And at least you had some sense, you understood what it meant to have 3 separate branches of government. Today, I don't think people have a clue.
The other thing was that I found when I was campaigning, my husband's gonna like this story about the Beagle lady. We were on Kenmont, campaigning on Kenmont. For some reason, we came back and forth onto Kenmont 3 different times that day. I don't know what was going on. And there was this woman who kept walking this Beagle puppy. And so finally, I felt compelled to say what I was doing, because it looked a little odd that these people kept winding up, getting out of the car, walking up to people's houses. So I went over to introduce myself, and she said, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" And before I could say anything, other than I'm running for commissioner, I said, "I'm a Democrat." She went, this. Of course, I was appointed to the commission before I ran. So I said, "You know, I'm your commissioner already." We ended up having a bit of a conversation about this sort of back and forth. And then I'm at the polls standing there there shaking hands as people go in. She walks up to me and threw her arms around me
No.
and said, "You're the only Democrat I'm ever gonna vote for."
Colleen, go ahead.
When I was running the first time, and I went to every house, you know, and it's interesting because I'm not sure the men do that as much as
I don't
the
know.
women that I've known, you know,
Well,
but
you did in the first war,
yes.
and the manor, Virginia Manor, that's not an easy walking.
It's all over. Yeah, that's a
Well, I
lot.
went to one house and the woman was actually, she was a staunch Republican and the polling place was actually in her basement.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I forget her name
Whoa.
now, but, so, you know. Did you? Yeah. So I thought, yeah, I'm gonna knock on the door. So she invited me in and she was a little leery and she wanted to sit me down and we talked and we talked and we talked. She told me about her trip to the Amazon with her grandson. They fell out of the boat, you know, it was so interesting. And by the end of that time, she said, "I'm gonna support you." And on election day, she had my signs in her front door.
Oh, wow.
And people were shocked. But it goes to prove, you know, a little bit of conversation. People are people, you know, and we can relate in so many ways. But the thing I wanted to say is that most people, when I was campaigning, going door to door, assumed I was running for the school board. Because women only ran for the school board.
Very interesting. You know, that garage in Virginia Manor where, at part of the home where people voted, that later became the basis of a lawsuit.
Did it? Oh.
Because it was a Republican home, obviously it was in 1-1, I guess it would be the first district. Valley View, yes, I think that's right. And she was a very nice woman.
Sarah,
Sarah
Moore?
Moore? Sarah Moore.
Yeah.
But one of our barrier-breaking women, I don't think her information's up yet. Some of you may remember the woman who sued Sarah Moore over this. A woman by the name of Sally Lupovitz.
I know Sally.
Sally Lupovitz. She was chair of the Democratic Party, and she was as feisty as they come.
Oh my gosh.
And,
They own the fur coat company.
yeah, they Lupovitz Furriers back in the day. And there was no question she was right that
Right.
state law, county rules would not permit you to hold an election
Right.
in someone's home, particularly a Republican committee woman.
Right.
I'm sure it was. Other thoughts, questions, comments? Jody, go ahead.
She gave House School one of the few original copies of the Battle of the Republic.
Did she really?
Sally
Isn't that
Lupovitz.
interesting?
No,
Sarah Moore.
Sarah Moore.
did.
Oh,
She
wow.
owned it, and we were celebrating our 50th anniversary.
Wow. That's
She
cool.
gave it to us.
Nice. Yeah, she was very nice and very affable. You could talk to her for a long time. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a comment. I want to thank you both. I'm Sarah, the daughter, the only, of this great big brother.
She's our little sister.
My comment as a kid who had to live with a mom who was a commissioner was a very fond memory at the time, looking back, at having the police, the Mount Lebanon police, would pull up to our house on a weekly basis and come in with a packet. And I'm a teen, and I'm, kind of flying under the radar. And then my older brothers are broken every go. So I had to ask my mom, like, why is a cop coming to our house every week, And of course, it was to deliver the crime reports from Mount Lebanon. Such a at the time. And then my other question about breaking barriers, because of course my mother, may her soul rest in peace, is my mentor, is in thinking about breaking barriers, I feel it's really important for women to mentor women.
Yes.
So do you have an opportunity in the roles that you have in Mount Lebanon, and I don't live in Mount Lebanon, to bring in women or speak to students and tell them about opportunities?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. Mentoring. Have you been involved in mentoring efforts, Carolyn?
Actually, I don't think I have. Maybe just as a mother with my daughter.
Role models. How about Colleen?
After I left the commission, I did a variety of things, but one of the things is I went back to school and I got a degree in nonprofit management, which is another thing I was always interested in, because I think nonprofits do what business and government either can or won't do.
Right.
So I worked there, but throughout my career, and I worked at 3 different places, I've always found myself in the role of mentoring women. It's like, it's something you naturally fall into, and I would hire some young women, and they would just come to me, and we had a wonderful relationship, and I felt that, you know, I was able to do for them what people like CAROLYN and JON DELANO did for me. So, yeah, it's been good, and I hope every time I run into a woman, and my granddaughter, I should say, just graduated from Lebanon High School, and she is going to the University of Maryland. She wants to major in international, international relations.
Yeah.
And she's the first person since me who's interested at all in that sort of government. So maybe she's getting it from me. I don't know.
Mine goes back to my career, really, and at one point, the Pittsburgh Partnership had they came out with a campaign to keep college students in Pittsburgh. You know, we need to be bringing in new blood, blah, blah, blah. And I was invited for some reason down to an event talking about this at the Wild Things Baseball Stadium, I know, really, in Washington. That's how I remember it. So I went down for that, and of course I was a little bit under the radar because it really wasn't very important. And so I was walking around asking all their interns where they were from, and lo and behold, they were all from Pittsburgh families. So I made a point from that point forward to everyone I hired at the AIA. I was hiring people that were coming in from out of town. And at my surprise birthday party, they all showed up, and they're all Pittsburghers now. And they're all women, and they're doing really great things. So yeah, I think I've always mentored women, but that's the Women's Scholars thing, you have to.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned the Washington Wild Things, that stadium down there.
Yeah.
That is where John McCain introduced America to Sarah Palin. I was there, and I ended up interviewing her at some point.
I've forgotten that.
Yeah. Of all the things. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Oh, and I'd like to know, Dave is the only male on the current Mount Lebanon Historical Society's executive committee.
And I don't know how I got there. But the first thing I wanted to thank Ann for something, your influence on things. So we do the walking tour for all the second graders.
Oh, yeah.
And a few years ago, we always go to the municipal building and we go in, where the council meets and Ann was there, and you did a great job explaining to the kids what a commissioner does. I was inspired. So.
Are you running?
No, I'm not running for commission. But, so what Ann did was, she explained to them and let me tell you, when the kids go in that room, they think it's a courtroom, because they see the chairs, and you have to explain to them it's not a courtroom. But Ann was explaining what the commission does, and she and interacted with kids and said, okay, we listen to what you have to say. She asked the kids, what do you like about Mount Lebanon? You're going to tell the commission what to, and the kids did, and then she said, what do you think things ought to be improved? And they did. Somebody wanted a splash
They all
pad.
want swimming pools.
Yeah. But I was inspired by that. That was a couple years ago, and I do the tours. When I go in the room, I don't know. I'm supposed to do that on the tour, but I do it. I get kids to sit up there and tell the rest of them.
Yeah.
That's the commission, and the other thing, and you have to tell them what you like and what you don't like, and they come up to the mic.
That's great.
But the other thing that's surprising, that's a civics lesson, is because we had parents there, and I asked everybody there, I said, well, who runs Mount Lebanon? you know, and I get this look, you know, oh, there's a mayor. No, there's no mayor. You know, it's like, so, you know, I think we have a, you know, and it's surprising. I kind of think we should do more of that.
Yeah.
It's John's question about the civics thing. But they're enlightened. I think they then understand, but I have to thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's certainly true that if you ask people who the commissioners are, they probably can't even name their own commissioner.
No, the one question, who runs Mount Lebanon? Oh, the mayor. We don't have a mayor.
Right.
Well, then who does? Who does mayor? And what do commissioners do? And, you know, and the adults the adults are as surprised as the kids.
So, yeah, number thought comments.
Hi, first I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you for your leadership for breaking those glass ceilings. Thank you. So what should we be doing to encourage more women to run, and what qualities are really the most important? Maybe some advice.
Great question. Advice, thoughts?
Well, Mindy, Randy, and I just pretty much hogtied Margaret Izzo and said she had to do it. No, that's a little overstated, but we really did sit down with her and walk her through and say, we need more women.
This is
So,
the woman candidate running for the second.
Ward 2, and she started the campaign with someone running against her as a Republican, and he's dropped out. Yes. Because
He tried to finagle it.
I know, but she's a strong candidate. It's pretty hard to do. She had all her yard signs out before he was even registering to run, I think. But I think that's what it takes. I think it's the personal approach. I think it is for any campaign. It's hard work, and you have to know people are behind you, and that people think you're capable of doing it.
The interesting thought there, just Margaret Izzo is running in the second ward, which is the ward my mother represented. My mother was in office for 8 years, retired in 1993. There has been no woman commissioner in that ward since then.
Wow.
So Margaret, if she wins, would be the first woman since 1993. Just an example
How long?
of the challenge for women. Other thoughts about, that's a great question about.
I just wanted to add that, you know, we all love government, and that's why we did what we did, but politics is tough. You know, and it's very difficult to talk to someone about politics and what they have to do to get to this position, you know, and it's not easy. And I think a lot of women also feel it's all worth it. And that's the problem, because it is worth it, but it's difficult. So, you know, I think the more we talk, the more we get out there in front of other women, that's the only way to show them that, you know, the rewards that you get and what you can do for your community is worth it.
Caroline, any advice and guidance?
When I was a commissioner for 8 years, the salary was $1,700.
It's $3,500 now.
Oh, wow. So, that's another reason. Paid per year.
Per year,
Per year.
$3,500 per year. Enormous sums.
Well, it's not a substitute for a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you also have to have a thick skin, and I think a lot of women don't have as thick of a skin as you have to run for office. You know you're gonna be criticized, no matter what you do, right?
I remember one time I was going door to door, and I introduced myself, and this person said, oh, I'm not voting for you. And I said, is there some particular issue you'd like to talk about? He said, no, my daughter just applied for a job at your company, and she was turned down.
Well, there's that.
That was Bill's fault.
Yeah.
Well, I'm from the city, but I moved to Pittsburgh in 1989, and I'm here because I'm a big fan of Carolyn Williams. But I have loved this morning, and I just love the energy, and I love what you have all brought to this. And Colleen, you just talked about we all love government. It reminded me, I heard a comedian one time talk about how with a group of second graders, he said, what is the government? Draw. Well, you can imagine, I mean, they got a sidewalk, I mean, it was pretty funny, but back to what is it, and back to our very important question about civics and how do we instill a love of government in kids. But thank you, and I just love how robust this whole conversation has been, and what a beautiful place you have. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. This goes back to the original point that all women in Mount Lebanon are barrier breakers.
No, I just wanted you, John, to tell the group what your father said about your mother as she went through her career and talking about Sally.
My father, who was incredibly supportive of my mother, I mean, Dr. Bill Biden would really reiterate this. You really cannot be successful if your spouse is so totally opposed. And I think each of you would say, and others would say, that it's because your spouse is supportive. So my father was very supportive of my mother. In fact, he comes out of the public relations world. So this lawn sign that my mother had, it's June and November. That was my dad. That was my dad. Now, it is also true that over the 8 years, he got exceedingly vexed by phone calls because he only had a landline. You couldn't call mom personally on a cell phone. You called her on a landline, and all the calls were for her, not for him. But the other thing that my father would say, that my mother did, after raising 5 children, she went back and got her master's and her PhD in early childhood development. She had been trained as an educator. She was a teacher before I was born. I'm the oldest. And but she went back, got her degrees, and then worked for the Pittsburgh Board of Education running the Head Start program for the city, and then ultimately went over to CAROLYN University to run their graduate program for teachers. She finally retired at age 85. I retired last year at 75. I couldn't make the 10 extra years. But
It's because you're a man.
But as my mother Ruth went through her various careers, back to Colleen's question, my dad always said that every time she took a new job, her salary got less. I don't think it bothered him as much as he made it sound, but it was kind of funny. Jeff.
Thanks to all of you for coming here and sharing all that. Just my personal story is I got to know COLEEN VUONO when she ran for state rep. And she was a role model and an inspiration to me. And then later I had the tremendous opportunity to serve an interim term as commissioner from the 4th Ward. I don't know that I would have done that unless I had my relationship with you. It only lasted 4 months. I ran for the seat and wasn't successful, but the person that beat me was a tremendous guy and basically did what I would have done anyway, so no regrets at all. What I did mostly with KDKA-TV was door to door. That was my real introduction. And I found in Mount Lebanon, most people they're at least courteous, let's say. You know, it never gets much worse. I had one experience though on the topic of the wisdom of women, which was encountering a couple both out doing yard work, approached the man first. This is 2000, so we're just in the shadow of Monica Lewinsky and that deadly question. And the first question is, are you Republican or a Democrat? Brace yourself, because you give the wrong answer. And he just unloaded on me. The whole world was in trouble because of us Democrats. And he got so upset, he finally didn't really finish the conversation. He sort of walked away with his veins on his neck all popped out. And as he's leaving, the woman approaches me and, oh, geez, here comes round two, you know? I'm gonna get it again. And she walked up to me, looked me in the eye, and she says, "Isn't he a jerk?"
By the way, Jeff, who was appointed commissioner, Jeff Hurd from the Fourth Ward, has been our past president of the Historical Society, some wonderful things in Mount Lebanon. It was Jody's husband, Dale Colby, who defeated him. And Dale was a wonderful commissioner.
Yes, he was.
Was it 50 votes?
50
votes. 50 votes. And yet, and Jody's been on our board for the Historical Society. You know, and that's what's great about Mount Lebanon. I don't think it matters what party you are. You really, if you have an interest, you work together, and you try to make things happen for the community. Any final thoughts or comments? I'm going to give the panel final thoughts time, and then invite everybody to come up, mingle. There's food back there. Please take a look at the exhibits. A final thought from anyone in the audience or question? Oh, I'm going to ask each of the commissioners to give a final thought, if they will. And again, about the importance of women serving in municipal government, not just school boards. Carolyn?
Yeah, well, let me just think about that.
Okay.
I'm gonna think about it too.
Well, Ann's there, so.
Here I am. So I think right now, municipal government is one of the most important things that is happening in the United States. There's so much performative politics on the national level, which I abhor, in case you couldn't guess. But even someone on the state level, that it really is a place to demonstrate that people care about each other and that we're trying to do the right things in our community. It's never been more important to put across, you know, what our values are and who we are as people, and cut the performance.
Go ahead, Colleen.
And I'm thinking about, I guess, all the wonderful women friends that I have. And, you know, how we support each other and have supported each other through the years, through some wonderful times, through some pretty difficult times. And I think women are so good at that. And I think that's one of the other reasons why women just add so much in government, because they get it. They just get it.
And Carolyn, you had the first word, we're giving you the last word.
There you go.
No, I think I mostly concur with what Ann said, that even though I'm addicted to MSNBC, I am so distressed by what's happening. Like even today, the fact that we've got 2,000 different locations where people are out protesting. And we just need to do things better on a local level, just small little step by step.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, how about a big round of applause?